This week, lawmakers in the U.S. House battled over the debt ceiling. Republicans narrowly passed a bill along party lines that would raise the debt limit through March of next year, but with large spending cuts attached. Democrats, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, said going back to 2022 spending levels would harm working Americans, veterans, seniors, and children.
The Default on America Act is a ransom note.
House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith said the Republican cuts are common sense.
It puts real limits on future spending so that we begin to turn the ship back in a more fiscally sound direction.
It was a week chock full of congressional hearings as well. Republicans examined pandemic school closures. Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic Chairman Brad Wenstrup questioned the head of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten.
But despite all this science, AFT still wanted to install some way to automatically close schools, which deviates from the narrative of doing everything we can to get them open.
Weingarten said she was in touch with the CDC and consulted doctors on best practices.
We know that kids learn best in person.
But before all of that, Americans heard from President Joe Biden that he is officially running in 2024 for a second term. While he made it official in a video, he was asked about his re-election bid while hosting the president of South Korea, specifically about polling that indicates most don't want him to run again, and many cite his age as a factor.
One of the things that people are going to find out is they're going to see a race, and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it. I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run.
While he has two Democratic challengers, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and author Marianne Williamson, the Democratic National Committee has said they don't plan on hosting debates.
Gosh, there's so many interesting polling numbers out there on this week. Not surprising.
Shannon Bream is the host of Fox News Sunday.
Fox News, our new poll, when we ask among Democratic primary voters, who do you want to vote for? The current president gets 62%. Hey, that's solid. That's very good. But RFK Jr. gets 19%. I mean, that's almost a fifth of primary voters are like, oh, I'm going to pick some other guy who probably doesn't have a real chance of winning. That's how much I don't want my current president, the leader of my party, to actually be the nominee the next time around. You mentioned the age thing. You look at the CBS News polling when they're asked for reasons, and these are people who are lean Democrat, independents, or Democrats. What are your concerns about and why you think he shouldn't run? Number one, his age. Number two, time for someone new. And number three, I like other Democrats more. So, I mean, his approval rating is not good. Any poll that you look at. But there's real consternation within his own party that they want someone else. They're not happy with him. But listen, if he's the guy, I don't think that most Democrats are going to jump across the aisle and vote for the GOP nominee. The question is whether they just decide to stay home if there's no enthusiasm.
Do we see any pivots, though, from this president as he campaigns for a second time in 2024? It sounds like he's saying, just watch me. I'll be out on the campaign trail, and you guys can judge for yourselves. But, I mean, now that he's seen the polling, and we've all seen the polling, does he make himself more visible, available?
Well, a lot of people are wondering about that, like how much more we're going to see from him. So we had this presser with him and the South Korean president who are visiting the same week that he's announced. But to really sit there and go at it with the press is not something he does very much. I mean, he lags way behind all recent presidents in availability. All of the press corps is complaining. They all want to see more of this president. He's going to have to get out there on the campaign trail. Listen, COVID changed everything in 2020, and running from your basement is not going to be an option this time. So there will be a real look for voters to have a chance to see him in action, how he is on the campaign trail, how he is with people, how he is with this grueling schedule of events. Well, also, to be fair, being the leader of the free world, it's a lot for any person. So I think he's going to have to get out there, certainly much more than 2020.
And this, I mean, as we were told earlier this week by a former Biden surrogate in 2020, you know, he will be president likely still at that time when he's running, and that's visibility in its own right.
Right.
Shannon, the reaction from Republicans, it was very stark. I mean, former President Trump was talking about like World War III in his reaction. The RNC had a fully AI generated ad that was full of very dark dystopian images. I wonder, was that too over the top, or does that resonate maybe with some persuadables who maybe feel like things are tenuous right now with Russia, China, banks, inflation, you name it?
Yeah, and you and I know, we've covered this enough, that people will tell you they hate negative, scary ads, but then all the data will show you that they work. So people may say they don't like that stuff, but both sides know that appealing to fear, often people will vote out of that versus a positive, uplifting message. This is kind of what Senator Tim Scott is out there testing in the field. Will people respond to this message of faith and hope and pulling together and counting on each other and staying away from name calling? And, I don't know. I mean, he feels like he's seen enough. He's got that exploratory committee now. But the fact is the dark, fearful ads work. History proves it. And for whatever reason, human nature seems to be persuaded by that.
You mentioned the Fox News poll. It did, as we've noted and we've seen, found former President Trump with a double-digit lead over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And DeSantis noted while in Japan, hey, I'm not even a candidate yet. But this poll also found broadly more people think banning books and not being accepting enough of transgender families are more important than trans kids competing on girls' sports teams or discussions about race in the classroom. For those like DeSantis who maybe would focus on those kinds of issues in a presidential campaign, what do you think he and other Republicans maybe should glean from this kind of polling?
I think probably DeSantis is one of these guys who, they all say this, like, I don't care about polls. I mean, he really demonstrated that during COVID. He was willing to do what he thought in his assessment of going through scientific materials and studies and talking to experts. I mean, he'll say, I make the decisions that I believe from my core are the right decisions. Now, in Florida, they've done a lot of this, and he won by 19 points after barely squeaking out a minor fraction of a percentage point in his initial election. So I think he's going to feel very emboldened. Like, listen, I've got my finger on the pulse of this stuff. The Floridians who turned out in droves and basically turned the state from purplish to solid red. What I did in Florida will work on a national stage. I mean, that's what he's been out testing around the country. So
yes, the Florida blueprint, right?
Yeah. And I think that he's going to make the argument that it will work nationally. He knows in some states that's not going to work. Those states may be ones that, listen, I don't know in my lifetime if we'll see a Republican presidential candidate win California or New York. So, they may just go ahead and take those off the table. But he knows in other states and across the South, the Midwest, important places, the polling may be very different. And he's willing to, I think if he gets in, ride that path and to stand by it.
A lot of oxygen taken up on the Hill this week with the debt ceiling debate. Republicans did vote to raise the debt limit, along with a bunch of spending cuts, though that's obviously tied in there. It doesn't seem like it will go anywhere, right? A Democratic-controlled Senate. The president's not going to sign it. But I guess it was meant to show, according to the analysts, that Republicans can stick together and that the president should negotiate. We don't have much time, it sounds like, according to the Treasury Secretary. So what will the president do now?
Well, even with in his own party, he's got Democrats now saying, okay, we understand, you don't want to negotiate over the debt ceiling, but we have to do something now. You said Republicans need to put something on the table. They have. The speaker, against most odds, pulled together enough of these votes to actually pass something. So that gives him something to go to the table with, like, hey, you said we need to come together on something. Here's what we've got. He knows he's not going to get everything in there. Democrats know they're probably not going to get everything in there. So the two sides are going to have to come together. I mean, what the speaker pulled off is to his credit. And the critics who said he couldn't do it, now he has something that forces the president's hand. And when you have Democrats now publicly calling on him to say, you got to get it together, we at least have to have some kind of conversations, the pressure's on now from both sides. And interesting to me, too, that several Senate Republicans have come out to say, like, hey, we stand with the House. Great job by the speaker, because they've kind of hung back and let him do his thing.
Yes.
But it cuts off that avenue if the White House wanted to try to go to the Senate GOP directly and have negotiations with them. The Senate now casting it with the House and supporting what Speaker McCarthy did means that the White House doesn't have that avenue.
Got it. Just a couple more for you. Other than the congressional debate on the debt limit, we had plenty of hearings, as I'm sure you saw. And we heard from Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, took a lot of heat over the school closures during COVID, going back and forth with Republicans in a sort of high-profile hearing, and really tried to defend herself, saying she was consulting with doctors and the CDC, and Republicans said her guidance was too draconian. I guess schools were closed for too long. But I suppose the question would be, out of a hearing like that, then what now? Like, God forbid there's another pandemic. Would anything be different? Did we learn anything? I mean, did we learn anything from this hearing that they've learned anything about if we have to pivot or do something else? God forbid we have another pandemic.
Yeah, gosh, I think that people lost so much faith in public institutions. And when you find out that people were having back channel conversations and things that they played dumb about, they'd already kind of negotiated behind closed doors. You know, those kinds of things. What I heard from all my mama bear friends this week who had school-age children who were living through this in real time, who are furious about their kids' lost year or two, depending on where they lived, and feeling like Randy Weingart now is coming out and trying to gaslight them. That's the phrase I'm hearing from some of these mama friends who are like, listen, there were states who moved forward and had kids in school. There were private schools who had safety structures in place. And, when there was a positive test, they had, their own way to handle this and to, keep the kids safely in. They feel like she was about the union and not about the kids. And they feel like she was caught in a lot of things that weren't especially transparent. And so, unfortunately, what I think is if this happens again in our lifetime, heaven forbid, that there's going to be so much skepticism about following the teachers unions or following the CDC or following the White House, no matter who is running those things, left, right, or center. I think, gosh, parents who lived through the last couple of years of this, very angry and very skeptical.
Got to hit on a foreign policy note before we leave. President Biden, as you noted earlier, met with South Korea's president. They pledged to work together on a number of items, especially concerning our national security and with North Korea. But as that was happening, I guess China's president, Xi Jinping, talked to Ukraine's president for the first time since this war began. And it was reported that Xi said, we don't want to add fuel to the fire. We want to end this war peacefully and help you do that. Do U.S. officials buy that and believe that Xi Jinping or Chinese officials will not help Russia out in the duration of this war, whatever's left remaining of it?
Yeah, they feel like if that was true, that China didn't want to give any advantage at all to Russia, they would really crack down on dual-use items like drones and others that aren't necessarily lethal aid or weaponry, but can be used for the battlefield. They think China needs to be much clearer about that. And they don't like this idea that China is going around the world trying to be the mediator of, issues in the Middle East. Now the war in Ukraine. It's the last thing that U.S. Lawmakers and leaders in the White House want is for Xi to be now showing up as if he is the one to bring people together, to bring, broken factions together and to be a balm on the, wounds of the world. I mean, that's the last thing they want. They don't want to be boxed out of Europe where he's trying to do it or Africa or anywhere else. So I think the last thing that they want to see is Xi stepping up to say, I'm the one who's going to, get this thing done. Although I think everybody agrees, maybe other than Putin, they want this thing over.
Fox News Sunday host Shannon Bream, thanks for joining.
Great to be with you.